Hey gang. So the new numbers for the last 2 weeks just dropped, and unlike the previous times, a lot of changes this time. A lot of sprints kind of picking up a lot of those things where I've been saying for a few weeks. I was kind of surprised that the downstream teams hadn't come in, or to expect those lines to really stretch out as more teams become involved. That actually happened in the last couple of weeks, or they just put the downstream teams in there. So without further ado, let's get into this. Okay, for those of you who haven't seen this before, I'll go ahead and I'll kind of give a quick caveat at the first. Basically, what this show is I just kind of go through the main focus is going through the progress tracker and talking about all the changes that I've seen. Basically, the significant changes that I've seen through the last couple weeks, and this time there's going to be a lot of those, so we'll get into that. But basically, what I do is what a lot of content creators do initially is I'll go through the roadmap roundup, kind of take a quick look at their release view just to kind of see what's changed there. Spoiler, not much. And then I'll go through the deliverables and kind of give my insight on what I think is going on. Basically just best guesses on where things are in the sprint. So without further ado, and the caveat, of course, is that CIG uses the agile system. So just because you see something that's 100% complete over here does not mean that it's actually imminently dropping into the game. It just means that their planned sprints are completed for that process. Jared actually talked about this, I think, 2 Fridays ago, and it was funny because for a long time I've been saying that the agile system of development goes on 2-week sprints. I wasn't sure if CIG adopted the same thing, but it looks like they do. So they go in 2-week sprints, basically an exploration sprint, see what they can do with an idea. And then if they can actually develop it further, then they go into another sprint. If they need more teams involved, they involve those other teams and so on. So just because something looks like it's completed, it might not actually be completed. Even if it's in the game, it doesn't mean that they're done with their sprints. They might keep working on it and iterating on it and refining it and polishing it with other teams, or even with the same team, might come back and revisit it. So just keep that in mind when I start going in here and looking at things that have wrapped. It doesn't necessarily mean they're wrapped, and I'll talk about a couple of those too. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the roadmap roundup. I'm just going to skip this top part. Notable changes for April 19th, 2023. Progress tracker. My baby. With this update, we're adding the majority of the Q2 2023 schedule for downstream teams, with additional teams coming in a subsequent polish. So that's why a lot of things changed. And again, I'll kind of get into that on the progress tracker because there's a lot of changes. The following deliverables have been added to the progress tracker. Headhunters faction outfits, developing multiple outfits variants for the Pyro Gang. The Headhunters. This deliverable has been added to the SC character art team schedule. So again, Pyro assets, I say this a lot, but don't expect Pyro assets, even if they finish, to truly be finished until they're going to drop Pyro, because with Pyro, probably at this point, I'd guess it's probably around a year off, maybe a little less. I'm sure they would love to drop it for the end of the year as a neat surprise, and they're kind of keeping that aspiration on the DL, but we could see Pyro at the end of the year. I would expect it to be more this time next year. We'd see Pyro. Any asset that's a Pyro asset, expect them to just polish and polish and polish until they drop Pyro. There's no reason not to. Headhunters, Rough and Ready faction, both Pyro assets. Rough and Ready faction outfits. Developing multiple outfit variants for the Pyro Gang, Rough and Ready. This deliverable has been added to the character art team schedule. New missions, mining resource rush. So this is cool. We haven't heard about this. Various large clusters of asteroids around Stanton are being sold off by several organizations. For a fee, civilians are given access to these spatial mining claims and allowed to mine until the cluster is depleted, drawing many mining crews and occasional pirates to these hotspots. This one is, I talked about this with the salvage missions that they're going to be rolling out, which is interesting because those actually dropped off the progress tracker, but they haven't dropped off the release views. So probably just a mistake on their Jira, and 2 weeks from now he'll pop back on. But one of the things that I've kind of been hoping CIG would do is use the beacon system to create mining claims. So if you're a player with a Terrapin or a Carrack or any other ship that's an exploration ship, Connie Aquila, you could go out, tag a location. Like if you find a really good rock with your scanners, you're not in a mining ship or salvage site, you could tag it and create a beacon for that location. The beacon would autofill with the information about what that target is, and then you could create a beacon and set the price for it. And there could probably be a suggested price, or actually that would be an extra game loop that if you're an explorer, you need to know that this asset is worth roughly this amount, and you create the beacon for that amount. A miner, salvager, or whatever future looper can look at that later and say, that's really worth it. I would make a profit off of that. So yeah, I'll buy that claim. And then they get the location of that beacon, where you could have already left and gone on scanning for the next thing. They buy the beacon, you get the money, they get the site, and they get the claim, the mining claim or the salvage claim. That's where I was hoping they were going to go. That's not what this is. This is NPCs, Quana basically creating a mission and you do it. So it's not player driven, which is kind of too bad. I think it's a missed opportunity. They could have used the mechanics that are in the game to create a new loop. End of rant. New missions, package extraction, a new multiplayer mission, where players will work together to recover stolen prototype ship components. Interesting. Crusader Security tasks players with extracting these highly classified components from the Ninetales transport ships before they can escape off-world. I wonder if we can keep those and put them in our ships and get benefits. That would be cool. New missions, data download. These missions task players with infiltrating ships defended by hostile NPCs to hack terminals with both lawful and unlawful mission types. That's cool. So that's hacking tier 0, which we'll take a look at when we get to the progress tracker, because there have been some changes there. So let's pop on over to the release view. Not much has changed here. We should be getting some changes for 3.18, since we're going to be getting 3.18.2, but they haven't dropped them in here. I expect there to be a couple ships dropping for Invictus, which is next month, and I expect there to be a very large ship concept that's actually in production right now to drop for Alien Week. I think it'll be a big Xi'an cargo ship, which go look at the last Sprintwatch and I kind of talk about that. But they actually haven't shown 3.18.2 assets on here, or even 3.18.1 assets, which is kind of weird. But 3.19, we've known about these for a little while. Lorville Seascape, well underway. New player experience, basically wrapped. Salvage contracts, it dropped off the progress tracker, but I just think that is a mistake. It's pretty much done. Ghost Hall PvP is just adding a PvP asset producer, kind of like the drug labs have, and just plopping it into Ghost Hollow, and then it becomes a new jump town. Kind of cool. Ghost Hall is a cool place to dink around, especially if you're playing against other players rather than derpy NPCs. Could make it a hell of a lot more interesting because the foliage is very dense. I could see that being pretty popular. Tractor beam attach and detach. This is kind of cool. We can actually start pulling out components and pulling off weapons and missiles and putting them in our ship or on our ship, which is very cool. I didn't think that we were going to be getting this one for at least another big number patch. I was thinking that that might be something we'd get for 320. I'm going to drop it in 319, which they're still saying is going to drop in June. I'm a little dubious about that, but most of these, to their credit, are kind of wrapped. And our side links is basically done, and I'll get into that when I go over onto the other side. So I'm kind of surprised it's still tentative. They can move it to committed, and I would not be shocked. This is the luxury version of the Ursa. So let's pop on over to the progress tracker. So this is the progress tracker, and just kind of a quick example of what I do with this. I set it to 1/4. And on the ones that I want to talk about, I've actually opened them up. And when I say open up, I mean clicked on that so that you can actually see the teams that are working on it. When it's closed, you lose a lot of context. You just get this big blue line. It's not always obvious when one team is working on it versus the other. And that's important information to have when looking at these things, because you look at this and it's just a long blue line. No real context. This way, you know, the actor feature team is working on it. It runs 12 weeks. You see that there's not any other teams in here, which with actor status tier 2, there might be a couple other teams, like some of the things they're talking about here: hygiene, NPC status tracking, multiple bytes. I don't know what multiple bytes is. DNA integrity, medical insurance, cybernetic limbs, and cloning. Like, we have had a sprint for concept art for cybernetic limbs, but cloning, it seems like there would be a UI team involved in some of this, and probably a couple other engineering teams outside the actor feature team. So even though this is a 12-week sprint, expect that one to stretch out. I do think that this will be a dark horse, basically tier 1 or tier 2 medical sprint, maybe near the end of the year. But this one came, actually not this one. So this one's fine. This one's still cruising right along. There weren't any changes on that. So like I said, I pre-gamed it. I should have trusted my pre-gaming. Aerodynamic control surfaces, just wanted to point out that that one's wrapping pretty soon. I don't think we'll get it for 318.2, but for 319, I've been saying for a long while that my internal expectation, even though it doesn't say it here, is that 319, in addition to these things, will hopefully come with a lot of traversal changes and a lot of UI changes. That's kind of changed a little bit if they really do intend to drop 319 in at the end of June, which is the end of Q2. Then that plan's gonna have to change to 3.20, which I've said is gonna happen. So end of the year patch. But if 319 gets pushed to around September, which at this point I don't expect it to, just because they're kind of sticking to this, maybe we might get the UI, we might get traversal. And when I say traversal, I mean like climbing ladders, new EVA, prone, swimming. There's one other that I'm forgetting, maybe a couple others that I'm forgetting, but basically new ways for your character to move around. EVA is a big one, and they've needed to fix it for a while. Aerodynamic control surfaces on target. AI vehicle perception. This is interesting because this is one that wrapped, but they brought it back and they added, I think, like 12 weeks, but now it's not going to be wrapping until near the end of Q2. So this is the one right now you can take a ground vehicle and drive right up to a bunker and the turrets won't shoot at you. But if you come in a grav bike, which is a flying vehicle, the turrets will see that and shoot at it. Now they'll see you. And I think ground AI, like the troops walking around, if you fly up to them, they'll see you and they'll shoot you. They won't do much damage to a ship that's flying around, but they'll see you and shoot you. If you drive up to them with an Ursa, you can basically run them over and they'll get up and they won't know what the hell's going on, even though this big truck is just rolling over them over and over again or shooting them. So AI vehicle perception is kind of a cool thing. I did think one of the things that I said near the beginning of the year is that 4.0 isn't dropping in 2023. One of the things that I would really like to see, especially with PES rolling out and server meshing kind of rolling in, I would like to see NPCs acting a lot more naturally and a lot more how CIG has been telling us they should act for the last 6 years. So AI vehicle perception is part of that. Bounty Hunter V2, this is another game loop, obviously. This one will be a lot more involved than currently. You just get a god marker to go kill someone and you know exactly where they are. This one, you'll actually have to hunt them. It'll say the last known place we saw them was here. And you're going to have to go there, and then you'll get like a little alert on your app that says, they were just seen here 10 minutes ago. So you go there, and then maybe they're still in the area. Maybe they moved on. You just kind of keep narrowing the window until you find them. They added 16 weeks to this one. So again, you're kind of looking into the year assets. So 3.20 maybe. Maybe 3.19 if they push to September, but I think they're going to try to drop it in June. We'll see. We'll see. Just a quick note on the Squadron 42 chapters. I like to say this every time. These will just grow and grow and grow. Every once in a while, they'll wrap like this and this. Don't expect these to finish growing until they actually go gold with the game, until they actually release Squadron 42 and it's out. There's no reason for them not to keep polishing and polishing and polishing until the game is released, just to make sure it's as polished and clean experience as possible. That on another point, if you see these stop growing, that's a really good sign that they're probably about to announce that Squadron 42 is going to be releasing soon, like for real soon, not soon. Character work. So one of the things I was kind of hoping last time, I'd say low key, but it wasn't low key, that they would drop a new character creator on us. This is a Squadron 42 asset, but one of the things I posted up in Spectrum was, why not release us the new character creator and we could test it before it goes to Squadron 42? No responses, but I would assume that the character creator and the character work go hand in hand. Just this one's more animation, AI, art and AI behavior. So it's even more than that, but character creator, I badly want. This one's stretched again. Again, it's a Squadron 42 asset, but it has obvious knock-on effects to the PU, especially since it's AI behavior. Chemline's back on. This is a gigantic station in Squadron 42. Again, polish until it happens. Just mention that the Crusader Spirit is still on target. Again, no downstream teams here, which is like audio, UI, VFX. None of those teams are on here, so expect this thing to stretch out. Crusader's pretty well sussed out now. They have a pretty good handle on what it is, so I wouldn't expect it to go more than 4 or 5 weeks beyond this target. The Crusader Spirit's about the size of the Cutlass or the Freelancer. It's not a huge ship, so I would assume all of the Crusader Spirits, barring the E1 if they can't get the passenger missions working, the C1 and the A1, the cargo and combat version, should be real easy grabs for the IA. This thing looks like it's come along. E1, maybe if they can get those passenger missions working, which the E1 is supposed to be the prototype for that game loop. So derelict ships had wrapped for a little while, I think, like back here. They added 12 more weeks, but again, it's just VFX that's working on it, which is the downstream team. Audio's already had their crack, so Yeah, I've said this before, but derelict spaceships, even when this one drops, and you can see it dropped in 316, they're going to keep, this one's going to stretch and stretch and stretch because they're going to add eventually every ship that's in the game, including the alien ships like the Vanduul ships, eventually. So this thing's going to go and go and go and go. So just because they added 12 weeks to this, not shocking. Distortion propagation, I just wanted to talk about this one real quick because the info runners had a show where they're talking about different ammo types. I don't think this is actually an ammo type. Distortion propagation is how distortion weapons as a whole work. So you've got energy weapons, you got ballistic weapons, you've got missiles, and you got distortion. So that's what I think this is. This isn't actually an ammo type, it's a whole weapon classification. Just wanted to throw that out there. Anyway, they're still working on it. Roughly finishing around Q2. I would not expect it to drop for 319 if it drops in June. I would expect that to be more, that sort of rework to be probably a 3.20 asset. Duster faction, again, pyro, so it doesn't really matter when it wraps. We're getting it when we get pyro, and that'll be rough and ready. Falls into that category too. Enemy characters was done for a little while. They just added a few more weeks. Again, Squadron 42 asset, polish, polish, polish. You'll hear me say that a lot. So Fire Hazard is interesting because it is one that had just wrapped when I did this 2 weeks ago, but they added 10 more weeks to it. It does look, it's GFX and VFX, which fire, surprise, in a video game is going to be very VFX and GFX heavy. Interestingly, no audio team. I would expect them to be in there, but both of these guys are downstream teams. But given that this is a very VFX heavy asset, it would make sense that they would have the lion's share of the work. Just added 10 more weeks to it, so just extended their sprint. I don't know when we're getting fire. It would be really cool to get fire with being able to pull components and stuff like that. But we don't know when we're going to get fire propagation. Hopefully soon. We'll see. Maybe a 3.20 asset. Who knows? So this one's interesting. So FPS devices actually ended back here with the weapon content team. So I thought it was finished. But again, this is another one of those things where they needed to wait for the downstream teams. So this is the Interactables team and the VFX team. VFX team, again, downstream team. Both had to take their shot. So we might actually be done with FPS devices here and might be getting on with 319. This is another one where we're going to keep getting more and more and more FPS devices, but this is how they're interacted with. So this might be the end of this sprint. Or it might go on. Freight elevator. So this one is a little disappointing. This one looked like it might be a sneaky ad for 319, which freight elevators is a prerequisite for persistent hangars and the way that the next tier of cargo will work. What will happen is you'll go into a station or landing zone or whatever, order cargo, as opposed to having it magically teleport into your ship. It'll come up on these freight elevators, and then you'll have to manually load it from the elevator in the hangar onto your ship, or load it from the ship onto the freight elevator, and then it'll sink down and go into nowhere. I think it will also be how things are delivered to you. So if you have a bunch of stuff that is in your local inventory that isn't stored in actual containers in your room, then it will come up on a freight elevator in your persistent hangar, and that is how you will get it. You will no longer have a magical bag of holding that holds all of your stuff when you're at your landing zone. It'll be physicalized in the sense that you have to physically locate it on a spot or in a location. And if you don't, it's kind of being held in a warehouse off screen. and then they deliver it to you, like physically deliver it to you. But they added 24 weeks to this, which is a bit. That's half a year, if you're wondering. So again, USPU team. I don't know what else they would be doing. Landing pads, garages, and docking collars, probably just maybe integrating it with the new underground bases. I don't know. But they added a bunch of time to it. So if you want to know when they think they're going to have Quanta and the new economy working, this is it. And I would assume this would also be a good indicator of when the whole sea would be possible, because this is going to come with the new cargo delivery system, and they're not going to drop that until the economy is working, and they're not going to drop the whole sea until this is working. So yeah, that right there is kind of your indicator of when you should expect to see the whole sea at the earliest. Frontier clothing, again, added 12 weeks. This is one that wrapped around the last time I did one of these. They added a few more, 96 weeks for clothing and pyro. I think they're going to actually add this to some of the areas in Daymar. I think they said that, or some of the NPC areas in Stanton, which is good, because this is one they're originally going to hold off until pyro. And now that they're realizing pyro is a little bit further off, gonna do it. Gen 12 render, add a few weeks to it. This is one that I've been saying for a while. Expect this one to just keep iterating and iterating and iterating. They're never going to stop trying to make the game run smoother, nor should they. Gray Cat Industrial Tool, this is one they finished for a long time. So this is a good example of why I break it out. You look at it this way and you just see this 114-week sprint. It's like, how long does it take to make a handheld tool? And granted, this thing is like bazooka sized, but still, how long? And then you look down here and the weapon content team was working on it here and finished. And then there's this big gap before the Squadron 42 team could come in and work on it, which is interesting because there's the Squadron 42 UI team that's working on a salvage tool, probably to repair your ship. I don't know. It's interesting that this isn't just a PU asset. Kind of gives you a hint for some of the things that might happen in Squadron 42. Like your ship might get shot down in a sequence, and then you've got to repair your ship and get back up into space. Get back into the fight. Hacking Tier 0. So this is kind of a newbie, unexpected game loop that they've been working on the last couple of years. They finished this one recently, and I was thinking it could be something that they could sneak into 318 too. It could still sneak into 319, but they added 10 weeks to it. VFX team, which this is one where I said I'm not seeing the downstream teams I'm expecting. VFX is one of those downstream teams, so that's good. GFX is another downstream team, so that's good. Audio already had their crack, so that's a good sign. So this one actually may be wrapping. I wouldn't expect to get this before we get the new Moby Glass, and I'll get to that further down below. Headhunters, factions, outfits, pyro asset. They just mentioned it in the roadmap roundup. Here it is. 12-week sprint. I think that's the concept art team. Character art. So they're actually building them out. But yeah, we're not going to get that until we get pyro. But there you go. Another gang. So life support tier 0. This one's a little sad because my hope was that 319 was going to be a sneaky engineering patch where we'd get all the things where your engineer could actually fix the life support or change which rooms are pressurized or unpressurized, that sort of thing. And basically from their MFD or their control screen, they could actually control the ship like they're supposed to. So it'd give true multiplayer or multi-crew gameplay. Unfortunately, actually, fortunately, they dropped 6 weeks on this one. So this one used to be 128. Now it's 122, but it's still it's saying it's wrapping around here. So if they were to drop 319 at the end of quarter 3 in time for IAE, basically, it might be. I would expect them to push 3.19 out the door with these assets and then make 3.20 something special for IAE, which is a little risky because, as you saw with 318, sometimes new and fancy things break things, and engineering could easily break a lot of things because it's going to touch literally every ship in the game. But this is looking like a 3.20 asset, which we don't know what's going to be in 3.20. But if I had to guess, if they push 319 in June, obviously this is going to be a later one. Lockable containers. So this is an interesting one. So this one wrapped a while ago, and then in the last Sprintwatch I had, they jumped it back on because another team was taking a stab at it, and now they took it off. Let's see, they removed 66 weeks from it, so they basically jumped this thing out because another team was going to take a look at it. I'm guessing what happened was during that 2-week sprint they looked at it and they're like, nah, it's pretty good. Your one team is like, maybe we could tweak this to make this do X, Y, and Z. And then they started working on, they're like, it's pretty good the way it is. It does what we want it to do. We want it to be a mini game. We don't want it to be a whole loop on its own. Let's just leave it the way it is. And sure enough, they went back to the way it was back here in week 13 of quarter 2 of 2022. So this one actually dropped 66 weeks, which can happen with Agile. Sometimes you start a sprint and you're like, it's good. We don't need to mess with it. So kind of going with my thought on 319 hopefully being a traversal and UI upgrade patch. It's kind of hit or miss there, but map and radar system rework is a huge deal for UI and the way you interact with the game, because the map has badly needed an update for a long time. If you've used the map in this game, you know what I'm talking about. This is why they haven't just hot fixed the map, is because they've been working on this rework for 108 weeks, which is over 2 years in dev time. Again, downstream teams wrapped a little while ago, so this is graphics and VFX both wrapped. Squadron 42 is working on it, and this is the other reason that this thing's been fast tracked, is because it's also a Squadron 42 asset. So I really would expect this to drop to us pretty soon. I would hope in 319 that we get this. The radar system is huge too, like flying nap of the earth, like behind mountains and stuff like that, should actually hide your ship now, so you have a reason to do the low flying. If you occlude yourself behind an asteroid, you should drop off the sensors because the asteroid is hiding your signature. That's the kind of stuff we should have, and that's the kind of stuff this is supposed to be doing. And they've been talking about this since the beginning of the pandemic, basically. So we've been waiting on this one for a while. Looks like it's finally about to happen. The one thing that's kind of disappointing is we've got the MFD rework here, which was getting pretty close to wrapping. It added 6 more weeks to it, which last time I did this, they added a couple more weeks. And it's kind of like, well, it's not the end of the world. Now they're adding a few more. It's kind of like, okay, because I think the MFD rework is one of those things we'll need before engineering gameplay comes in, and now it's deep into quarter 3. Last time it was kind of pushing the very edge of quarter 2, which would be 319 territory. Barely. I was saying it was on the envelope of getting punched out. Now it's looking like it got punched out. So MFD probably 3.20, which would kind of strengthen the argument that 3.20 might be their target for an engineering patch. And I know I said the exact same thing for 319, but just looking at the assets and the sprints here, it looks like they kind of had enough engineering things that they wanted to tweak or polish up, that it's looking like it's going to be an end of the year asset rather than a middle of the year asset. Military multi-tool. Just want to point out this one came back on Squadron 42 UI team. This might be a good sign for Squadron 42. The UI team is kind of going back and doing a lot of swings on these things to kind of be, I would assume, polishing patches, which is a good sign. They've been real quiet about Squadron 42, but I think we're kind of in the home stretch for Squadron 42. Doesn't mean it's going to be dropping in December, but I wouldn't be shocked if in December they give us a release date like 2 years out. Would not be shocked. Hull C, briefly talked about this one. It's more or less finished. They did mention in their monthly report that they had people working on it, and there's no reason not to, that until we have the new economy up and running and the freight elevators and all the physicalized cargo. And yes, I know that cargo is physicalized now, but I mean like the big boxes, that it actually exists in the economy, and it's not just you buy stuff, you sell stuff in the economy. It just doesn't change at all. The Hull C, Hull Cs can't land on planets when they're laden. So like when they're carrying cargo right now, nearly all of the assets that you can buy are on ground locations. So it's going to have to be smaller ships transport stuff up to the stations in orbit, and then the Hull Cs go to those stations in orbit. And that is kind of the main holding place for cargo in the verse, will be those space stations, not the ground locations. So the Hull C will be bulk transporting stuff from one station to another, and the smaller ships will be going from the moons or the planets back and forth from the station as the Hull Cs bring stuff in. So the inventory will have to actually be physicalized. So if a Hull C doesn't bring 100 units of kitty litter in, that station will not have a supply of kitty litter until that happens. And it will send out an order for kitty litter that either a player or an NPC can do to transport it. And that'll be another mission, which I'm going to get to in a second. On this one, the Mission Manager app. So they dropped in a bunch of missions, which they actually talked about in the roadmap roundup, and we'll get to in a couple seconds here. But I would assume another one of those missions that they're going to drop in, and this is also a good indicator of when the Hull C is coming, is cargo running missions. Like not pick up this one box from this outpost, but we need 700 units of our cargo move from A to B, and we'll pay you this much to do it. So you're not buying 700 units. They are paying you to move 700 units of whatever it is from point A to point B. You're basically just a truck driver. You're the transport that moves it. You don't care what it is. They're paying you for the delivery. There you go. Mission Manager app. Their Mission Manager app isn't bad, but we have seen this one before where it uses building blocks, and they had a bunch of things on there on, I think it was an IAE like 4 years ago, where there were a SitCon I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, where they kind of flashed it up on the screen and you could see all their new missions. And it was things like kidnapping and assassinations and dangerous transportation, and they had different qualifications and all this, and everybody was like, whoa, what's all that? I want to hear about that. And they haven't talked about it, so it's just too bad. But Mission Manager app, that's basically what they were talking about then. Again, looks like it's wrapping here. I would not expect to see this one maybe the end of the year, but we'll see. We'll see. So the Mobiglass rework, this one's a little bit disappointing because they added 16 more weeks to it. The Mobiglass is one of the things that we're going to use to interact with the whole verse like we do now, but this is going to be building blocks, so it's going to be much quicker, and they will probably be able to start rolling out custom ways you can set up your Mobiglass. Like, I want this app, basically like your cell phone. But they added 16 weeks to it. It looked like it was going to wrap pretty soon. I would assume Mobiglass rework would be needed for any of the new mission things, and pretty much any of the new loops, anything like bounty hunting and stuff like that is going to make use of this Mobiglass rework. Pushing past, I was hoping this would be one of the UI things that would hit for 319. but it looks like it's pushing past that window if they're going to drop it in June. So maybe 3.20, maybe they sneak it to us in 3.19 and just keep working on it, kind of like they did with the Scorpius and Scorpius Antares, where they gave it to us, but they're like, we're still working on it. And they did. So I'll go ahead and read the descriptions on these because they're kind of interesting. Already read it under the roadmap roundup, but sometimes they put different information in here, like this. These so new missions data download. This is one of the new missions they're rolling out. These missions task players with infiltrating ships defended by hostile NPCs to hack terminals with both lawful and unlawful mission types. Let's see if that is the same. These mission tasks, yeah. So it's the exact same verbiage. Made a liar out of me. They're jerks. Mining resources. Yeah, it looks like that's the same thing too. Again, these are all kind of wrapping. These new missions are all kind of wrapping around the same time, which looks like pushing that window of 3.19. So I would expect 3.20. I would not be shocked if they drop for 3.19, because right now the end of June is 8 weeks away. Not a lot of time to wrap those things up. I would assume end of the year 3.20 patch, but we'll see. Maybe they surprise us. Oh, and the only other thing that I wanted to note is that the new missions salvage one is missing. Don't panic about that. It's still here, the salvage contracts. So it's still in the game. Just sometimes on their Jira, something will drop off, and it's not because they're not working on it. It just, something got lost in the sauce and it dropped off. New player experience wrapped. Origin X1. So this is one that I kind of like to talk about. It has an 87-week sprint for a space bike. No, it doesn't. They had one group work on it way back here, and then they have this great big giant space until the next team picks it up. Anytime you see a gap this big until that team starts work, don't hold your breath for that asset. It's basically this team saying we might be able to work on it after June. Like, let's get through 3.19 and then we'll work on it. My guess for the X1 also, and I say this pretty much every time, I'm guessing they want to save the X1 for the 600i rework. And the 600i is on ice right now until teams become available. So even though that wrapped with its 17-week sprint, it's got a little ways to go. A long ways to go. But with the 400i asset pack, 600i should be a little bit easier to pull off, but there's no reason to not drop those two together. Actually, I guess there is, since the 400i has a special hanger just for the X1. But we don't really need a hover bike in the game right now. Even though I have, I think, all three versions of the X1, I do really like the way it looks. Anyways, persistent habs is interesting because it reduced by 15 weeks. Again, this is one of those times where I'm not totally sure if they kind of got in there and they said, oh no, we can wrap this up. We're basically done with persistent habs. There's not that many places people can put things. Whereas persistent hangers are a little bit more complicated for anyone that was around back in the hanger module days before we had flyable ships. You had this hanger that you could customize and kind of put special things in there. I think if you look at the store, you can still actually buy like the beard moss and the locker from another universe and whatever. You can buy these assets that you can put in a hanger. That's what this is for. Eventually, it used to be for the hanger module. Now we're going to have our persistent hangers, so we don't need that anymore. But persistent habs, they're wrapping right now. There is a strong chance that there's just another team and they don't know when that team is going to be able to work on it. So they know the USPU team is going to have a sprint that's going to end around here, and they'll just kind of sit on ice for a little bit until they get to the next level. But persistent habs should be pretty cool. It looks pretty neat. Persistent streaming and server meshing. This is another one of those, just expect it to stretch and stretch and stretch. They're never going to stop trying to iterate on server meshing and persistent streaming to just smooth it out and make it as clean as possible. They're still up against the speed of light, so latency is always going to be an issue, but try to reduce all the other factors as much as possible so that you don't have as much lag. That said, they reduced this one by 17 weeks, which is interesting, but I would expect persistent streaming and server meshing to go on for the next couple of years. So every few months you'll see one or another team, like especially the net, the PT team, will just kind of take a stab at it and kind of keep it going. Physical damage and breakability. So this is one, Cameral, who I follow, who you should follow too. He kind of does tests on various ships, and pretty entertaining to watch. He can be a little critical in some ways, and he doesn't always have the best information, or the most up-to-date information. Like, he doesn't do a lot of research, or he'll just be like, oh, that's bullshit or something like that. It's like, no, it's not bullshit. I mean, it's literally right here. Like I mentioned to him, I think he was talking about how vehicles, yeah, it was the one where vehicles were hanging out at like a 90-degree angle, which is a problem. And I kind of threw a comment on there where I was like, yeah, you can kind of tell that ground vehicles aren't a Squadron 42 asset because they kind of put that new ground vehicle physics on hold for the meantime. And he was like, no, this isn't a matter of asset. It is. I mean, they don't have unlimited devs to work on things, so they focus on the things that are most impactful for what they're doing right now. And it turns out that vehicle physics is not a huge need for the teams right now, so it's been backburnered. That's just a reality of game development. Physical damage and breakability is another one of those he mentioned, where he said it's nowhere in sight. No, it's in sight. It's literally right here on the progress tracker. 125 week sprint. They've been working on it. This one is one of those that's absolutely necessary for vehicle munching, because this is where you actually break the ships apart. But it's also other objects other than ships would be breakable, I believe. Just here we go. So making use of the physics engine to create a system that looks and behaves realistically when large objects such as ships are damaged by weaponry or colliding with other ships, locations, or planets. So there's your damage and breakability. In theory, 319-ish, which would make sense since they want vehicle munching to... They drop vehicle munching off? Oh no, that's right. They haven't put vehicle munching on here yet, which I have been saying. That's right. Okay. So I had originally said that I was surprised that vehicle munching wasn't on here, and I'm betting it's because damage or breakability is proving to be rougher than they thought, like actually making ships break into form in realistic ways, or at least ways that are semi-believable. I'll bet that's a problem, and it's slowing them down a little bit. They added 13 weeks to this, so this was something that was going to wrap. So don't expect to get vehicle munching until physical damage and breakability is working. So this is the indicator that you want for the next tier of salvaging. I think they'll probably solve it. If they solve it by here, if you don't see this one keep stretching and stretching and stretching, by week 13, might be a 319 asset. They might be able to sneak it in there, and that would be a nice add to go along with the component pulling. But I think that that's another reason why they had the component pulling on the ships, was because they weren't sure if they were going to be able to get this in. And so they're all like, well, let's get another tier of salvaging out there So easy win with the tractor beams. Let's just physicalize the components and the weapons and stuff and have it so we can pull it off. And that was easier to do than breakability, apparently. Ropes. So this is an interesting one because this is one that physics rope simulation, they've never talked about in any of their shows like ISC or the Friday Live Show or IAE, or, I guess I wouldn't talk about an IAE sitcom. What are they going to be using ropes for? Because you read the description, extend the simulation algorithm of ropes to support ropes interacting with pulleys and improve general stability to enable the development of new gameplay mechanics. 75 weeks. That is a lot of dev time for the physics team to be spending on ropes. So I am assuming ropes are going to be used for exploration, like going down to caves. Maybe moving things around on backwater worlds where you don't have charging for your tractor beams. I don't know. It's both Squadron 42 and the PU. So it evidently has some part to play in Squadron 42. I'm assuming you can carry a rope around with you to rappel into a cave or something. Who knows? Ropes. So this is another one where kind of wishful thinking got the better of me. The visor HUD and helmet, which I thought was a strong candidate for an easy win on a UI update being in 3.19. You can see that this one is pushing past that window of that June release date. Again, if they're going to drop 3.19 to us a little bit later than that, it could still sneak in, still be a UI one, but this is looking like a 320 asset. So pyro system, planet, and mission setup. Again, until they drop pyro, just expect this one to stretch out because there's no reason not to just keep polishing it until we get pyro. So refinery ships is an interesting one. This is one that wrapped quite a while back. And then in the monthly report, they mentioned refinery ships and they brought it back. So you can see this is Q3 here. So around the time of IAE, they're going to wrap on refinery ships. So might we be seeing the Expanse? I don't think we'll see the Expanse, but I think they might have some sort of refining loop added to the Starfarer would make the most sense. But it's interesting. I would not expect the Expanse, which is the starter refinery ship, to be one of the unannounced ships. They have no reason to make that one a secret. Like usually the ones that they hold back are the ones that the community is hammering for, and they don't want to disappoint the community by saying, we started work on this. No, we didn't. Like you could see the backlash they had when the BMM was dropped, that people are still salty about that. Me-ish. But anyway, refinery ships, they are working on it. Huge part of the loop for mining. Not sure if it would really have a part to play for salvage. No, that's mostly a mining loop, but refinery ships is really kind of the last loop that we have for mining, is refining all those goods ourselves. They still have to create assets that the Orion and the large miner, the RSI large miner that we haven't heard about, or that we know that they're going to start tackling. But yeah, this would close that loop. Basically, you'd have all the elements, then they just need to scale it up for the Orion and the large miner. Rough and Ray faction, mentioned it in the roadmap roundup, starts in a couple weeks. RSI links, this is one that's going to be a 319 asset. Downstream teams, VFX, audio, they're in here now. And how I said that it would stretch out 3 to 4 weeks, I wouldn't expect it to stretch more than a month. Sure enough, there it is at a month. Again, this one's an easy win for the 319 patch, no matter when they drop it. Polaris, now 2.5 weeks in, it's not going to be a 24-week sprint. That thing's going to be 90s or in the 90s or in the hundreds. easily. It's a big ass ship. Salvage vehicle munching. So like I said, this is the one that needs damage and breakability. See, here's Q3. So it looks like they're going to move vehicle munching to IAE. So as opposed to having vehicle munching for 3.19, they're going to have the component pulling, and they're going to do vehicle munching in Q3, Q4-ish IAE time, 3.20. Sliding, just want to mention this one because it kind of goes along. That was the one that I forgot, by the way. Traversal, like if 3.19 is going to be a traversal patch, you can see that this one is ending right before the window. It's kind of in that gray area for whether it would be on time for 3.19. But if they do end up dropping 3.19 a few weeks past June, maybe this makes it in and we get our traversal options. Subsumption editor, this one added 16 weeks, which this is basically the scheduling for the NPCs. Sort of sets up an NPC, wakes up, goes to work, goes to the bar, goes home, goes to sleep, takes care of hygiene, that sort of thing. It also handles kind of the back end of moving all the cargo around that isn't done by players, which is huge. So the fact that, I don't know, maybe we get by the end of the year, that's something that I would expect us to have before Pyro drops. So maybe a 3.20 asset, just get the economy working, then drop Pyro, which just kind of drops a huge wrench into the works, where some assets can only be had in Pyro, and Pyro is going to be badly needing assets. So the supply and demand, supply will be low, demand will be very high. So if you can transport goods from Stanton, where supply is very high and demand is probably low, to Pyro, you'll make a bundle. But Pyro is an ungoverned system full of pirates that will know that people will be bringing stuff in. So risk reward. That's why I think we'll have to have a working economy before they drop Pyro, maybe. So swimming is another traversal option, wrapping again around that 3.19 window. So I mean, I could see them sneaking a lot of things like the new EVA, sliding, swimming, climbing ladders, prone, all of that into 3.19 would be really cool to finally have all of that in game. EVA in particular has really needed a lot of work for a long time. All right, so now we're down to the unannounced ships. These are the ones where I kind of like to spend a little bit of time, but this time I've kind of said everything I need to say about these in the last couple episodes. The 78-week sprint, especially after reading the monthly report, I'm leaning heavily that this is a big GN cargo ship, probably. Just based on the fact that it has a unique entry system, which all of the races just use ramps or stairs. The GN use floating cargo beds and stuff like that. So yeah, I would expect this to be GN, and obviously a big ship. The concept art sprint was 60 some weeks, and the Odyssey, which is bigger than the Carrack, took 55. This is a gigantic ship, and they've been working on it for a long time. Drops, in theory, they're going to finish the concept art. They're actually building the ship, which is interesting. They're building it concurrently, and a lot of overlap in between the concept art and the actual building it out. So a lot of hand-holding between the concept art team and the modeling team. So probably in gray box. Wraps here around week 8. June, which is right about here, is Alien Week. So yet another indicator that this is probably a big ass alien ship. So during Star Citizen Live, they briefly talked to the VFX, well, not briefly, I guess it was a half hour, talked to the VFX team 4 weeks ago, and they mentioned the Misk Fury. since that was the VFX team that was working on it, and this is the only unannounced ship where there's a VFX team working on it, guess what this is? 41 weeks is not a large ship. That is something small. If it's MISC, I would expect it to be something industrial, despite the name Fury. That said, I was thinking about this earlier today, that Crusader was supposed to be like a touring and commercial ship, line or shipyard. And then they came out with the Ares series, which are heavy fighters with huge guns on them. And everybody was kind of like, really? Crusader? Does that make sense? And I don't know. And MISC does have some combat ships, but they're all variants of industrial ships. So would they have something that's a light fighter? They kind of already have the Razor LX and the MISC Tana, or the Reliant Tana. So they've got some fighters in there. So a fighter would just kind of be really out of character. What I would expect this to be is a ground vehicle and maybe a hover vehicle. That would make sense for MISC, is something that incorporates GN tech. And I mean, we don't really have something the size of the Atlas platform, which is the Ballista, the Spartan, and the Centurion is the Atlas platform, basically a 8-wheeled truck. It would make sense that MISC would have kind of an industrial version of that. Why they would call it the Fury, I don't know. There is a Honda Fury out there that is a bike, like a big chopper. So I was thinking that maybe this would be a grav bike for MISC, which they're missing. They're missing something in that tiny category. So they're missing something that's like bike sized, hover quad sized, car sized, maybe a hover car. And 41 weeks is in that arena. So small fighter isn't beyond the pale, but it competes with existing ships. So I don't think it's a fighter despite its name. That's what I'm going to stick with until they drop it. And when they drop it and it turns out it's a small fighter, I'm going to be like, I totally called it. 15 weeks vehicle concept art. 15 weeks for just making the JPEG is about average. So that's probably something that's freelancer-ish sized, which they honestly need more ships in that size. So good on them. 29 weeks, this is straight to flyable. 29 weeks is a pretty quick sprint. So you can see this one was 41, and I think it's a small vehicle. 29 weeks, sort of same deal. But again, straight to flyable. There aren't any downstream teams on this, so this one's going to stretch out. Wouldn't be shocked if one of the things that they teamed with Persistent Hangars would be a flatbed version of the Atlas chassis that can move the big cargo containers around. Would make a lot of sense. So as opposed to having the little turret on top with the two smaller guns, that would be a tractor beam, and you could actually tractor beam the big cargo boxes onto the back of a flatbed. Would make sense to drop that with the Persistent Hangar, because then you could actually move stuff around on the truck, get it loaded up right in front of the ship, and then you move it on there. I don't know, or at landing zones or whatever. 28 weeks vehicle concept. That's a little bit longer sprint for making the JPEG. So think something roughly 2 times the size of this. So you're talking, this could be 28 weeks would be about right for the concept of the RSA miner, the heavy miner that we're supposed to be getting. So that might be what that is. And that is something that they could sneak in on us. When will we be seeing it? They might have the concept sale for $319. That would not shock me. Yeah. And gang, that's it. So that's all I got. So a little bit more moving parts this week. So thanks for sticking it out. Thanks for watching it through. Let me know any questions you might have, or any insights you have. If you think I'm way off on my predictions for those unannounced ships, always like to hear about that. Or on damage and breakability, if you think I'm an idiot. If Cameron, for whatever reason, wants to come into my comments and tell me I'm wrong, I'd love to chat it out with you. Anyway, that's all I got, King. Like and subscribe if you haven't already. We've kind of had a little bit of growth the last couple months, which I wasn't expecting when I started this stupid little channel. So thanks for watching. Catch me next time.